Good morning. I'm excited to welcome you to today's seminar on how the UAE is supporting climate-resilient infrastructure across the Middle East, and for us to learn more about why it matters, as well as examples of tech and financing opportunities in play. The IPCC report from earlier this year left no one in doubt. Climate change is here, it's real, and we must confront its realities if we are to thrive on this planet. The top line things to address in today's seminar include how climate change will affect infrastructure, how the UAE is working to decarbonize its infrastructure network, examples of technologies and adaptation measures being deployed, and new business opportunities being created, and finally, financing options for smart infrastructure that can be responsive to climate challenges. Allow me to introduce our wonderfully gender-balanced panel here for this seminar. We're delighted to have with us today, joining us remotely, Joachim von Amsberg, the Special Advisor to the President at AIIB, Her Excellency Dr. Nawal Al-Hassani, UAE's Permanent Representative to IRENA, Her Excellency Fatima Mohammed Al-Fora Al-Shamsi, Energy Policy Executive Director at the Department of Energy, and Omar Al-Marzouki, the CEO of AIQ. Joachim, good morning remotely here on the screen. I'm going to kick it to you first to help us kind of frame up this issue. Globally, more than $50 trillion is needed by 2030 to upgrade existing and build new infrastructure. Inadequate infrastructure continues to hamper socioeconomic growth and overall sustainable development. In the Middle East, in particular, with our harsh climate, we see this. So can you set the scene for us a bit? What is AIIB seeking as it looks for investment opportunities? And what are you anticipating in terms of climate change as it affects roads, buildings, transport?
Morning, and thank you very much for having me on this panel. I do really want to congratulate the UAE for convening this session. I mean, the Gulf region is just so important as an energy leader in the world. And so your seriousness about climate resilient infrastructure really sends an incredibly important signal that matters worldwide. Now, as you mentioned, study after study have shown that if we just let climate change happen, sort of live in a business as usual world, people and economies will suffer. And they will incur a cost in terms of loss of lives, loss of income that is much higher than the cost of taking action to fight climate change and to decarbonize our economies. AIIB is an infrastructure finance bank, and climate change and infrastructure are intimately and closely connected, which is why we are so interested in this topic and really keen to make a contribution to this topic. The changes in the world due to climate change have profound implications for the nature of infrastructure, both in terms of adaptation and mitigation. And let's look at those two in turn. First of all, adaptation. Some warming now appears to be unavoidable. In fact, is already underway. And so infrastructure that is built today and even the infrastructure that exists today needs to be adapted, needs to be made resilient to extreme weather events, to flooding, to extreme wind events. And so whether it's transport projects where the alignment of roadways and tracks needs to be adjusted for the flooding risk, or whether it's other infrastructure that needs to be made resilient to extreme weather events, even today, those decisions need to be made to adapt infrastructure, make infrastructure more resilient, and that applies to both public and private investment. So that's the adaptation side. Then let's come to mitigation. Carbon emissions are directly linked to infrastructure. 40% of carbon emissions come from the energy sector, another 20% from transport. So if we don't decarbonize these two sectors, we can forget about fighting climate change. And so investments in renewable energy, energy efficient housing, public urban transport, all are absolutely critical elements for mitigating climate change. Governments need to lead with high level targets, ideally, but not necessarily based on international agreements. That will then lead to adequate carbon prices, regulation, And then the private sector is best placed to find the most efficient way to implement, invest, develop new technologies that are suitable and resilient to climate change. Now, we as AIB opened for business just a few weeks after the Paris Agreement came into being in 2015. So we are a new multilateral development bank that has put the Paris Agreement and the fight against climate change into its DNA. We have committed in our strategy that by 2025, 50% of our financing, our total financing, would be for climate finance. 50%, half of our financing. Just this week, our President Jin announced that by mid-2023, 100% of our financing would be aligned with the Paris Agreement. That's a big commitment and shows that AIB is serious about helping its members implement their commitments and their objectives on climate change. So I think that's where we stand, and we're very, very keen to work together with you, together with the UAE, to help our members make the necessary investments in both adaptation and mitigation.
Thank you. Dr. Nawal, I want to zoom in a bit on IRENA and the UAE's really strong partnership. IRENA has an online platform to bring together financing for specific renewable energy projects, so real on-the-ground work. The UAE has played a major role as an investor. Can you talk a bit about this multi-stakeholder approach of bringing together financing opportunities and different stakeholders, and how the UAE's activity to date on these projects has gone?
Thank you so much. Let me first start by thanking you and AIB for organizing this seminar, and ADFD and all the organizers of this event. It's actually such a breath of fresh air to have in-person events. Sorry you are joining remotely, but we are really enjoying this event here in IRENA headquarters. We are actually at IRENA now. You know, I think when it comes to climate finance, as we call it, the biggest elephant in the room is finance. Because on one hand, you have countries that, you know, they don't lack willingness, they don't lack ambitions, they don't lack drive to decarbonize their economies and invest in renewables, but they lack finance. And then you have banks and investors who really want to contribute to this incredibly promising sector, but they cannot identify the right projects. And this is where this idea came from. So we started with the partnership between ADFD and IRENA with their 7 cycles, and now we have more than 25 projects on the ground, and some is being finalized now, and it's $350 million. We also launched, the UAE launched in partnership with the Pacific Islands, with the Caribbean Islands, with a total of $100 million. The importance of having these platforms is creating this partnership. You know, you identify with the experience of IRENA and the experience of the teams there, you identify the right projects. And then with the experience and the tools that a partner like ADFD will have, we manage, and AIB and others, we can create the perfect fit. So, you know, we, following the success of ADFD, IRENA facility, IRENA also, in partnership with other players, created a very important platform, which is the Climate Investment Platform, CIP. And now we are looking at launching something, you know, hopefully big during COP. So just stay tuned.
Okay.
We're going to announce.
Not this morning.
Not today. We are announcing soon. So the importance of those platforms is you have, you know, subject matter experts within IRENA that identify the right projects, do their assessment and the readiness of those countries, and support some of those countries in developing their policy framework, their regulatory framework, identify the right technologies, because, you know, with renewable energy, it's very much very dependent on the context. So identifying the project, identifying the technology, and then basically connecting them with the right partner to develop. And the UAE, with the tools that, with the support of ADFT, has provided and experience, is definitely created a great example to be set and to be followed by other players.
I'm hearing from you a really tailored approach, a partner-based approach. Your Excellency, I want to bring it over to you with your immediate experience here in the UAE. Your focus on Abu Dhabi's energy transition and water security strategies are your life's work. So what are some areas of impact that might be scaled or replicated elsewhere in the region to help build up our climate resilience as we think about infrastructure in the Middle East?
First of all, thank you for having me, and it's good to be back to Irina after, I don't know, it was before COVID, since I've been here. As you know, we have invested on sustainable project and energy transition even before the reduction in the cost of renewables. So we started with renewable, and I think everybody is having an information about our project in Abu Dhabi, like Noor Abu Dhabi, which is 1.2 gigawatt. We have the Al-Dhafra project under construction for 2 gigawatt, and definitely that was the solar project was the start of climate activity. Starting definitely with defining different strategies in this regard. So we have the UAE energy strategies as stated. By 2050, UAE will reach 50% of its capacity as a clean energy. Here in Abu Dhabi, we are reviewing our target every as a forecast for 10 to 20 years, but our 7 years plan is every year updated, and that's going to from the energy perspective of decarbonizing the energy sector. And that's, of course, will go to the water, and considering the decoupling of water generation. As you know, mostly our municipal water is mainly desalinated water. Our plan here is to, or this is what we have started, decoupling of the water generation from electricity generation, going from thermal desalination to the membrane desalination, mainly reverse osmosis. And I will give as an example a Tawila project. The Tawila project is 200 mgid of desalinated water is expected. But this is not the only impact. Yes, the electricity can come from the grid, which might be either renewable or not renewable, but this Tawila project is coming with 40 megawatt of solar also. To connect with. Demand side management targets has set in Abu Dhabi as 32% by 2030 reduction in water demand, and 22% for electricity by again 2030.
Thank you. Sorry.
One of the things that we are now working in is 100% utilization of recycled water. The integrated water resource management strategy that has been announced by IAD has defined the planning of the water as a one source of water, and based on that we have developed integrated water model, and we are planning to achieve 100% utilization of recycled water. Different project is going on, and soon we'll celebrate 100%.
So bold numbers, bold scale. Omar, bringing it over to you, AIQ is playing a really fascinating role in ADNOC's future. Launched 1 year ago through a tie-up between ADNOC and G42 to develop AI applications for the global oil and gas industry and help accelerate industry adoption of advanced technologies in the UAE. So let's talk AI and decarbonization. What are the possibilities and where can automation have the biggest impact here?
Thank you, Kelsey, and Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Very good morning to all of you. Thank you for having AIQ present in this important panel that is sitting aside in the AIIB annual meeting here in the UAE, tackling a great issue of the world, which is the climate change and decarbonization of the infrastructure. Coming on the right time with the recent UAE announcement of the 2050 strategic initiative for net zero, comes really out of the long chain of serious commitment and actions by UAE to help compacting the climate change issues and the huge investment that has been in the past and the future investment that we are hearing today from the UAE's plan. In the energy sector in specific, being the contributor of this emission, big portion of this, in ADNOC in particular, have been always adopting the best-in-class technologies to ensure that all its operations are operating in the best efficient manner and the highest performance with a great control of the emissions. And it continued to be the strategy because ADNOC strategies are very much in line with the government's strategies, especially the ones that talks about the sustainabilities and the climate change. So it has been always the strategy within ADNOC to adopt the best-in-class technologies and continuing really to embark on the emerging technologies like the AI have been always the strategies. And in the last 5 years in ADNOC, we embark on what we call the digital transformation journey since the last 5 years. And this journey have revealed several strategic initiatives that helped ADNOC and the energy sector to improve efficiencies, enhance profitabilities, and control emissions. And one of these strategic initiatives was the existence of AIQ, actually an AI company that will today produce the advanced technologies here in the UAE, in the heart of ADNOC, by having a joint venture between the national oil company ADNOC and the national technology company Group 42. What we are bringing here in the JV is a very unique combination between the subject matter expert, domain expert of the oil and gas, with a vast amount of data, with the technology experts and the professionals of data scientists, and the technology infrastructure of AI, which is the cloud-based supercomputing capabilities, bringing those together to create an entity called AIQ to develop, deploy AI solutions to the energy sector and to be in the future a hub of AI for the oil and gas here in Abu Dhabi and UAE. What have we created really, if you're talking about the possibilities, we have established since a year now. We have 50 plus of AI data scientists, AI experts, and the capabilities of AI tools that have been developed and deployed to ADNOC operations today. So the possibilities of AI is big, and we can share some of the achievements next maybe.
But you're really speaking to the power of localizing technical expertise
Absolutely.
and bringing that capacity home.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because the vision was really, in order to sustain this business, it was really to move from being a technology consumer to becoming a technology producer. And that's the power, because as I mentioned, the uniqueness and the power here is combining the two national companies, bringing all these efforts towards, embracing this and adopting of advanced technologies to help really infrastructure decarbonization, improving efficiencies, looking on specific AI solution that will control emissions and help the environment.
Would you say that ADNOC over time could be a vendor of technology in addition to energy?
We are today, as
you
we
are
speak,
today already, right?
Alhamdulillah, we have managed to produce advanced technologies that are under deployment as we speak. Hence, the vision is really to expand and export these technologies to the rest of the industry.
Mm-hmm. Joaquin, bringing it back to you, you spoke of how AIIB's very DNA has the Paris Agreement within it, but I want to talk about, we've sort of set the table as to what solutions, applications are currently in play in the UAE, in the Middle East, but now I want to talk about challenges. Can you just talk about financing these projects, being responsive to climate change, and what are the hurdles you're seeing in this 5-year track record you're amassing?
Well, I think the financing of the large needs to decarbonize economies and infrastructure faces quite similar challenges to the financing of infrastructure in emerging markets in general. And I think we have gained a lot of experience on that over the decades. I mean, you're facing this, what I would always call like the infrastructure finance paradox. There are huge needs for investment, and now amplified by the need to decarbonize the infrastructure sector. So there are huge financing needs on the one hand. On the other hand, there are actually large amounts of financing available. Investors who are looking to deploy their money in a low interest rate environment, looking for yield, looking for attractive projects. And yet these two, the need, the demand and the supply often don't meet, and the actual financing flows into emerging market infrastructure remain really quite small. And the reason for this paradox is that it's just complicated. It's complicated, and many players need to work together to make the financing flow. You need the policy environment to be right, the regulation to be right, you need projects to be developed and prepared, and then the financing to be structured properly with the risks allocated appropriately to the right parties. So many players need to work together and form this ecosystem of partners who make infrastructure finance work. Now, luckily, over the last years and in fact decades, a lot of experience around the world has shown how this can work. And one can benefit from that experience to make financing work for.
We're frozen here for 1 minute. We'll give him, he's back.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
The first lesson really is the critical importance of a stable and clear regulatory and policy framework. I mean, the easier and the clearer the policy, the easier it is to assure the financing. You can see how countries that set very strong high-level targets for renewable energy have been actually able to attract private investment. And the renewable sectors are booming in certain countries. In other countries, where the regulatory environment is uncertain, where, for example, there's uncertainty about future feed-in tariffs, investors stand on the sideline and wait for governments to send clearer signals. So it's very clear what governments can do and should do to attract financing. And then the key is to combine different financing sources. Public finance will be necessary for certain public investments like flood control. There is some concessional financing that's available from sources like the Green Climate Fund and some other concessional sources. But increasingly and mostly, private finance will be needed to meet these huge needs. Multilaterals like the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, I think, can help both on the public and the private finance side. And And I think they can be critical elements of sort of bringing together the ecosystem, creating trust and creating the connection between public policy and private finance. I think that's a role that multilaterals have played effectively over decades. And as AIB, we want to add to that role. And as a MDB that is focused exclusively on infrastructure, make our mark, help members really attract the private finance that's necessary to finance the energy transition and to decarbonize the infrastructure sectors.
Dr. Narwal, you mentioned earlier just trillions of investments are required for the global energy transition, and that need extends to countries that can ill afford this. You referenced this earlier, but now I kind of want to dig down into more specific examples. So how is IRENA, with the support of the UAE, rolling out renewable energy projects in developing economies and marshaling these vast public-private resources that Joaquin was just speaking to?
Thank you so much for this question. I think when we started, with the partnership that I mentioned between ADFT and IRENA, and that facility was extremely pioneering because it was, and I think still is, the first of its kind in the way it was designed and the way it was implemented. So we not only identified, because what happens is you have the fund, and then you want to make sure that, to Hakim's point, we want to make sure that there is a political commitment behind those projects. So there was a lot of work that was done with the governments to ensure that those projects, when they are implemented, they are actually bringing great value to the country, not only with infrastructure, which is very, very important, but also creating knowledge, creating jobs, creating and having a more of a socio-economic impact in those countries. And this is the real success of those projects. So, there is a lot of, I'm sure you've seen some of them, but there are so many case studies that we have seen coming out from those projects that really heartwarming, because it transformed those communities in a way that was beyond what we imagined. And through the different cycles of those projects, we've seen the impact of those projects on those countries, but also we've seen how we are learning as we are moving. So we learned from different technologies that were implemented, we learned from different approaches, and we have now this knowledge within both teams, within ADFT and IRENA, that is extremely valuable, because there's so much experience in doing those projects that were that were created and with other partners, which is Masdar, because some of those projects were implemented with our national company Masdar. So this unique knowledge is what's going to be transformational when it comes to implementing future projects. With IRENA's knowledge, we have now the World Energy, World Energy. Sorry, I keep forget. I understand. When you are linked to the abbreviation and you forget what's the energy outlook. So the World Energy Outlook that
the IPCC report?
No, the IRENA report.
Oh, excuse me. Yes, the annual
that was launched very recently.
Yes.
Shows a clear roadmap for countries how to get there.
Yes.
So, but what that report actually showed, which was really interesting, it showed there is a path. So there is a hope for us to reach the Paris Agreement, and that's what's really, really important. But to your point, trillions of dollars need to be invested in infrastructure, in renewable energy, in technology, and there is, as Hakim mentioned, there is this finance, there is abundance of money, but we need to match it with the right partners, either with countries or with technology providers, and this is what the UAE can kind of present. As you heard from the speakers in this panel, the UAE has, and I'm not just saying it out of being so proud of my country. I am very proud of my country, but it is the truth. The UAE pioneered this sector in a time that they didn't need to. We started this transformational movement towards renewable energy and sustainability, and as early as 2006. when the oil prices were like very, very high. So it wasn't a reaction to a need. It was something that we've done with intention, with determination, with leadership, that we need to be, we don't need to, but we want to be part of shaping the future of sustainable energy. And today, the UAE is not only an oil exporter, the UAE is renewable energy exporter. We have projects in more than 70 countries. The UAE's footprint on renewable energy is in 70 countries around the world, developed and developing. We partnered with the UK, we partnered with Spain, we partnered with many developed countries, but we also are creating great change in developing countries through providing support in infrastructure. And most of our, and this is very unique to the UAE, and I'm sure you heard from ADFD team, the UAE now is linking so much of its aid to infrastructure in renewable energy, because what we've seen is the socioeconomic benefit of such projects is phenomenal. So back to your question, what the UAE is doing, the UAE is actually, with their knowledge and experience that we've created throughout the years, and the partnership that created throughout the years, is now offering that and providing that around the world. And and I keep saying that we are the only OPEC country that doesn't only export oil. We also export renewable energy and renewable energy knowledge.
The sun and wind as well. Yes.
Renewables, yes.
Your Excellency, to Dr. Nawal's point, there's action on the ground, certainly, but there's also this future orientation and this idea of future generations, really, in the UAE and protecting them. And I want to talk to you about how you think about future generations in terms of food security and water security.
Okay, thank you. One of the things that before I start answering this question to Joachim's point of the role of the government, I think one of the success factors that impacted the reduction of the solar projects in the UAE, which was the start for the reduction in the whole world.
The price reduction.
The price reduction.
Yeah, the achievement of the price reduction. Yeah.
The price reduction of the renewable or the solar PV is basically because we have an existing public-private partnership system for IBB that started in 1990s, and that was a good tool that support the reduction on the financing for solar PV. Back to the question, because I could not keep silent for this question. Definitely, the linkage is clear between the water and food security. Within the water energy food nexus, it's one of the area where we build our strategies taking care of this nexus. The government of Abu Dhabi announced in 2019 the agri-tech incentives of 1 billion for to support different partners for the research and development on the agriculture sector. Now, the linkage between the water and food security is really there. We are in a country that has less participation. We are not blessed with a normal or a high participation like other countries. We're also suffering of very high temperature, especially during summer. So the need for water for agriculture is there. And our demand-side management program focusing on reducing the water used for agriculture, but keeping the agriculture and securing the food security. Defining this balance between both is what we are doing in developing different research. One of the promising areas that we have conducted is using Internet of Things for centralized controlling of the aggregation for different type of group, and I think a percentage of 34% of saving in water has been achieved using the technology, the Internet of Things, but also other different research is going on using soil additive and other to see how this will impact the reduction of water.
It's a powerful example. You're connecting crops to the cloud so that you can make sure you know when to water. Yeah. So Omar, I want to talk more about, that's a good transition because data really is the bedrock for a lot of these initiatives. We talk about IoT and agriculture, but for AIQ, your bedrock, your lifeblood is going to be data. It's often hyped, but it's really challenging to get clean, reliable data to inform decisions, let alone build sophisticated AI models that can make decisions for you. AIQ, it's a separate entity from ADNOC, and I think that speaks to the specialization and the power of this asset. Can you talk a bit about AIQ's approach to data, how you clean, manage, and help, have it inform you?
This is a good question, actually, because we believe that data is the new oil, as you might have heard. However, having huge data cannot mean anything if you don't make a good use of this big data. And in order to make a good use of that big data, which is a precious thing, you need three elements, actually. One is the infrastructure of the data, building a platform that collects data and manage data, in which we did in AIQ, building a special data management platform, and the infrastructure of the cloud supercomputing. So for data, you need the infrastructure as a one element, and then you need group of professionals and specialists and AI experts that can collect data, that can read data, that can clean and QC data, alongside with the domain expert that understand what this data means. So only then, with those two elements, having the infrastructure of data and platform, and having the expert and data scientist that clean data and manage data, you cannot imagine what's the power of powerhouse you are having here, making good use of your big data. We created the platform. You know that we have the infrastructure of the cloud here as a national cloud. We have the expert, 50 plus of experts that are working on these data to really help the efforts toward energy transition and decarbonization of the existing infrastructure.
I want to talk more about AI. Certainly, you're measuring a lot, and Joaquim, I want to talk about measuring for impact and how at AIIB you are really thinking about impact and what mechanisms you're using to anticipate and measure the impact over a longer time horizon of your investments. Are you able to do that? That's a muscle to build, certainly, but how are you approaching that right now, and what are you doing to measure impact?
Well, we are a development bank, so we have a mandate to help our members with their social economic development that is about impact. So we are first and foremost about impact. We have given ourselves the mission to finance infrastructure for tomorrow, and what that means is infrastructure that is sustainable, socially, environmentally, financially, and infrastructure that adds value to societies in ways we've defined quite specifically. So we've said we want to finance infrastructure that is green, environmentally sustainable. We say we want to finance infrastructure that uses technology, and I think that links just to the previous intervention, which I find really fascinating to hear about examples of using technology to increase the efficiency, upgrade infrastructure to achieve higher impact. So that's exactly the kinds of advances that we want to help our members finance, but also finance infrastructure that creates new connectivity between our members. So we think about impact in terms of this sustainability and the environmental sustainability and the compatibility with the Paris Agreement is one, if not the most important dimension to that. That means for us, what comes first is the quality of project design, the quality of the government policies that support these projects, and then sort of good structuring of the financing behind those projects. Now, we are a very young institution. 5.5 years ago, we've been founded. We are starting, but we're very quickly scaling up. So we have, in the first 5 years, financed almost 150 projects with almost $30 billion. But because we are young and we are a lean organization, we are very keen to partner with others who are interested in impact through infrastructure investments, whether that's our member governments, private investors, project developers, or others. And so that's why I'm very, very happy to be on this panel. And in particular, I think, see how we can capture the opportunities in the UAE, where so many partners have thought ahead, have already invested, have experiences that will now be relevant as our members and countries around the world think about how to get out of the COVID crisis. Unfortunately, it will still take some time, but we see that investments in sustainable infrastructure is actually exactly the impact that's needed to get out of the crisis, create momentum for economic recovery, create employment, and contribute to the energy transition and the transition toward decarbonized and sustainable economy. So I think it's a quite critical moment where we can and want to partner with you to help our members invest in sustainable infrastructure that is ready for the future.
I want to drill down a little bit more on sustainable infrastructure and measurement on impact. Are you looking at job growth, economic growth, revenue? Drill down, what are the most important metrics?
Every project has its own results framework that goes beyond the financial return, looks at does the project meet all the requirements to protect people, to protect the environment? Does the project generate carbon emission reductions? What's the quantity of those carbon emission reductions compared to a business as usual scenario? What is the social impact created? What are the jobs? Breaking down jobs created by gender to make sure that the entire population benefits from those investments. So we look at the environmental, social, and economic dimensions, break them down into detail, put for every project on our website documents that have that results matrix that we can then look at throughout the project implementation and when the project is completed to determine whether the project actually had the impact that was expected or not. So I think that rigor is really important if we want to move beyond slogans toward sort of rigorously following up on investments that have social, environmental, and economic positive impact.
Thank you. Dr. Nawal, I think perhaps you're going to get the last word here. We're headed into, you are our host here at IRENA after all. We're headed into COP26 next week. And so I would like to be a bit forward-looking in sort of summing us up here. What are you hoping to see, or what are you expecting to see from the UAE? And what is the Middle East's real place at the table here in this really critical conversation next week?
I think we just, as Omar mentioned, we just announced our net zero initiative by 2050. And that created a ripple effect in the region. You know, a few days after that, we heard about Saudi Arabia and Bahrain having the same target by 2060. What that means is that we now are very serious about not just as was mentioned, just about theories and debate and negotiation. Negotiation is very important, and I'm sure, and I hope that we can close all the pending topics at the rule book and move on from negotiation, theoretical negotiation, to an actual action-oriented climate negotiation, and that's what we are about. The UAE, when we announced this strategy, as Omar mentioned, built on more than 15 years of action to accelerate the advancement and adaptation of renewable energy and sustainability, we mean business. We looked at this as a very clear growth opportunity. So for us, climate change now is a threat. It's definitely a threat, but also provides a very important growth and economic opportunity for the region and for the UAE, building on technological advancement that we are investing in, building on the knowledge that we created throughout the years, the experience that now we have through all those years. And we are looking into literally adapting a lot of actions and announcing a lot of actions as we move on to COP26. And hopefully, as I'm sure you've heard, we also placed our interest to host COP28. So hopefully, as we have this path of COP from Glasgow to Abu Dhabi, we are going to see a lot of actions.
So negotiation over, time to recognize the opportunity.
And action.
Dr. Nawal, Your Excellency, Omar, Joaquim, thank you so much. Really fun to be here in person with you all today. Thank you, and online as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you, AIIB.